Meeting of the minds. Josh Neighbors here from Locked On Big 12. Spencer McGlaughlin here from Locked On Pac-12. You all missed the show before the show. Spencer and I spent about 40 minutes talking about conference realignment. It would have made for good radio, Spencer, or podcasting, because we just kind of traded sentences and probably people wanted long.
It might have been hard to follow at one point.
Yeah, it was not long strains of coherent thought. No. We're brought to you all today here by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make sure you guys check out the FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the #1 sportsbook in America. Bet on anything. You guys can check out the FanDuel Sportsbook, great interface, all those kinds of things. So this conversation, we're going to talk football. That's where we're going to start. I have to ask you though. Give us a timeline for what you think and when you think the Pac-12 will announce a television deal. Because
I think it would be
statement last week from the presidents.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for the Pac-12 to have its conference basketball tournament, even though basketball is secondary in all these media talks. It would be pretty hard to have that tournament ongoing, and the amount of national eyeballs you'll have, which is obviously greater than what you'll have in the regular season, at least doesn't compare to football, but it's still, it's, the audience, the presence, where the games are broadcast and whatnot. It'd be pretty tough from a conference level to go into that tournament, have it play out, and not have a media deal in place. I think what they're shooting for here, there's a possibility, and this is speculative on my part, I could see the deal having already been done, the details all finalized, but they're waiting until just before that tournament starts to roll it out so that they can use that as kind of the, here's our deal, here's what we have, and here's why we feel good about it, and all that sort of stuff. Because you could dominate the media cycle right now, sure, but if you're talking about maximizing the amount of attention that you're getting and any expansion teams that you could add, you would probably want it to coincide with your conference basketball tournament, especially if one of those teams is San Diego State, which would, I think, today be the #3 team in the Pac-12, because Pac-12 basketball is just abhorrent right now. Like, let's not even get into that conversation, because goodness gracious, it's just a mess. Absolute mess.
So I think also on that, the #1 thing with all of this is with the conference commissioners and the schools is get the grant of rights signed, right? It was one of the questions that John Willner and John Canzano asked Brett Yormark the other day when he was on their podcast was, is the grant of rights signed? And he pretty much unequivocally said yes, right? That is the big key for the Pac-12 schools. And look, you seem very confident, and you and I actually, for as much disagreement as we had before the show, you and I are on the same page, like pretty confident that they get a deal done. The big question is just going to be, what is the payout per school? Is it a contract that's going to include the additions of San Diego State and SMU? And is it one that brings them along financially, or do they ever even make them full partners? But I think you and I are of the belief that they get a deal done. I think you're a bit more sure about it than I am. I'm kind of more in the 65-35 they do. I think you're more towards 80-90% they do.
Yeah.
So your thoughts on that, and also, I mean, would you just want to announce it to get this thing out of the way because the amount of heat on you? I get it. I think there's some value to that, though, when it really downtime when it comes to the college football schedule.
So I don't have the utmost faith in one thing, and that's that the Pac-12 could be this savvy in terms of content and attention. But maybe, right, kind of piggybacking off my thought of when they would roll it out, maybe right before the conference basketball tournament. Is it just a kind of like marketing, get attention, all publicity is good publicity sort of thing? Get everybody focused on when are you going to get a Pac-12 media deal, and let that ramp up a little bit and then release it? It's like, that's just a thought. Now, has the Pac-12 historically been that savvy in terms of utilizing social media and buzz spaces and whatever you want to, whatever else is out there? And there's too much for even me to keep up with, and I'm in this sort of space. So the answer to that is probably no. But I think if they add San Diego State and SMU, who I think are the two best partners, there are a lot of quality expansion candidates that the league could add for various reasons, and I've talked about those on my show. For those of you who are Locked On Big 12 listeners or viewers, you can go back and go through. There's basically a running series of evaluating expansion candidates there. But San Diego State and SMU look like the clear two choices there. They will not be, as Utah was not when they joined from the G5 ranks back in 2011, a full-time earning media rights member in terms of the payouts. And on the expectations front, I don't know if they can get to the Big 12's number. I don't think it's impossible, but I think as long as you're, within 5 million or so, that's not putting you at a major competitive disadvantage for the athletic departments in terms of how much money they have compared to their peers. Because the other conference that gets left out of this sort of stuff, and the Pac-12 and Big 12 get tied together because there are people who think that the four corner schools are going to go in something like that, which I do not share that particular opinion. But look at the ACC. No one's talking about the demise of the ACC or are they going to be able to stay together? Or can they be competitive and whatnot? And their media rights deal is right around where the Big 12's is. So
it's because it runs through 2036
correct.
and you can't break it.
Right. That is correct. Which, by the way,
at the same time, it is a horrible television contract, but also it's good because if you're talking about security, because nobody can
high floor, low ceiling. That's the ACC's
really
media deal.
It really kind of evens out in the middle, right? It's like,
so
great, we're gonna make money together.
Right, and so on that front, that's why I anticipate the Pac-12's media deal being probably in the 6 to 7 year range. I'd be pretty shocked if it goes above that, because I think what they're going to want to do is have SDSU and SMU come in as part-time media rights earners and then see how much value they can provide and bring to the conference. And in 6 to 7 years, you hope they're able to raise their profile, be competitive within the league, perhaps be more attractive to television networks or streaming partners or whoever could be involved, and then renegotiate the deal again, right? Because the Big 12's deal expires in 2030 to 2031. I think they did it with the same exact mindset there. And I think the question for George Kliavkoff is, do you want to renegotiate your next deal before the Big 12 or after the Big 12? And only he and the television partners can really know the answer to that question.
I would say before, judging off what just happened, right? I mean, I think the big,
that depends on how this media rights deal goes.
When it comes to this conversation right now, and everybody's basically saying this, but the Big 12 did undercut the Pac-12, right? The Pac-12, they had the inside track, and the Big 12 went early, and they got their deal done. Now, maybe people could say, hey, they took less money what they're worth, but that kind of reset the market. It's frustrated a lot of Pac-12 folks because they think they're not getting commensurate value for what it's worth. But the Big 12 made a pretty smart, savvy move of getting security, making the additions, and now also guaranteeing that their window, they will be up again pretty soon.
Right.
And once again, the SEC is going to be up. The Big 10 will be up. I'm sure the SEC will probably be up again. And then the ACC, they're going to beat the ACC to the open market again, maybe even a second time around, right?
Yeah, I know. Which is going back to what we're talking about with regards to the ACC there. But I think for the Pac-12, they're looking at what the Big 12 did and said, okay, maybe we want to come under, or we want to renegotiate first. Maybe we want to renegotiate second. Might depend on what they're able to get this time around, right?
I would say it's first.
If they come in potentially, unless the Pac-12.
Come on, Spencer, you can't argue that the Big 12.
No. Hold on. If they pull a rabbit out of the hat and they get, say, $34 million per school per year, and it's above the Big 12, which would be seemingly wishful thinking at this point in time. But if they were able to do that, then maybe they would. But
but there's no indication that that's going to be the case.
At this point in time, yeah. There was also, until USC and UCLA left the Pac-12, no indication that was really going to happen. And then all of a sudden,
right? But this is.
Yeah, no, I know. I would say there's like a 10% or less chance that they could get in the mid to upper 30s. Like I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't think it's particularly likely, which is why, going back to my original point, I think it'll be kind of in the 6 year range, maybe 5 to 6 year range. Like it could be a pretty short deal so that they can get themselves out there, build the conference as best they can athletically, and then be in a position where they feel like they can get significantly more with San Diego State and SMU as a part of it. And with the Big 12's deal being up in 2030, 31, I figure that, this deal is going to start in 2024, right? So I think 7 years would be the absolute maximum, but I would guess, my year guess would be 6. And if they can get at least 27, 28 million per school, then I think they'll be fine.
All right, we're here. A quick word from our sponsors today. We're brought to you all by LinkedIn. If you are hiring, you need to find somebody for your job, go check out LinkedIn today. It's the best place. Also, if you need a job, good place to go. If you're not on LinkedIn, folks, get on there. It's going to help those hiring managers, all those people you want to impress. It'll help them find you and hire you for whatever job you are out there looking for. You guys can post your job today over at LinkedIn/LockedOn. It'll help you post your job for free. Once again, it's LinkedIn.com/LockedOn, LinkedIn.com/LockedOn to post your job for free. Terms and conditions, they do apply, folks. And so one more thing on this, I want to ask you about the job George Kliavkoff is doing. So what is your estimation of the job that he's doing right now as conference commissioner? Now, I will say this, difficult hand, right?
Impossible hand.
Paying a ton of money in
Impossible
rent.
hand.
Paying a ton of money in rent. Pac-12 Network's a disaster. And it's not his doing. But I will say the one area where he missed, and once again, this is my opinion, that they missed with when their television deal came to market, and they're having a tough time right now. They've not done the deadline they want. It sounds like they're not going to meet the financial goals they want. So it's, you can't check every box you want, I guess, in that situation. But your assessment of the job that Kliavkoff has done as commissioner.
I think his biggest misstep to this point was placing trust where it was not reciprocated, and that was in USC and UCLA. Because, look, in hindsight, yeah, you should have gone back in time, and the Pac-12 would have probably loved to have added maybe Houston and, insert other schools, maybe Houston, SMU, San Diego State, whatever, right?
Maybe even Big 12 schools.
I think if you could go back in time 2 years ago, you'd say, let's go get SMU and Houston. I think that's the biggest one. Because one school that I think is not in the running, according to John Canzano recently, was Rice, which, look, I was not crazy about, but it was certainly an option, right? They're an elite academic school, definitely a fit in that sense in the Pac-12, and they're in the Houston area. But
their academics or the athletics are just so crap.
Absolutely horrendous. And I mean, just that like they can't do.
It's hard to be an engineer and play college basketball.
They've been to like 2 bowl games, and I don't know if they've won it in the last decade or so. Like it's been really, really rough on that front. So I think when you look at what George K has done, that's the biggest misstep so far. But he was given the reins of a pretty tough situation because the Pac-12 network did not get the sort of exposure that it needed to in order to sufficiently market these schools to athletes and students across the country, because he couldn't get it on DirecTV because he wanted to have these he just got too entrenched in this specific vision and wasn't willing to check the big boxes first. And that was a ginormous misstep. And that, along with USC saying, no, we don't want to add any schools at this point in time, and then turn around and say, by the way, we're going to go to the Big Ten. That's kind of the biggest misstep there. Can you blame him? Yeah, I guess, but I don't think it's a colossal mistake. I'm holding judgment on him until I see what the media deal actually is, what it looks like, and how it compares to the other conferences, because that's ultimately the most important job for a commissioner right now in college sports. So when you say, how are you assessing, like, I know people want to look and say, oh, he's doing terrible, the Pac-12 this, Pac-12 that. Like, it's all sentiment and speculation right now about the Pac-12 is in a terrible place media rights wise. They could be. You can make that argument for sure, but until we actually see the deal, you don't know.
I would say, Spencer, the issue for them is they're in a bad place narrative wise. And look,
narrative wise, sure, but narrative is not always reflective of reality.
Sure, but perception can sometimes be reality, and I think. I
think perception can influence reality.
Well, sure. Actually, and I think that's the one problem they're having right now. And look, I would say for the Pac-12 presidents, like here's the one thing we do know. They all would like to remain together. Yeah, we'd all like that, right? They would all. I think for the overall health of the sport, that would be great. I'd like Oklahoma and Texas back. I'm sure you guys would like USC and UCLA back. It's not really the reality now. We have to kind of look out for ourselves.
Pac-12 fans would like USC and UCLA back without them having announced they're leaving first. Because I can assure you, now that they've announced they're going to the Big Ten, Pac-12 fans would like to kick them out the door.
It's the same thing that happened with Oklahoma and Texas, right? I mean, we saw what has happened there. Right? You saw them, get the deal done because everybody kind of wanted to move on with their lives. And so that's what happens in those situations. But I will say he is – maybe he's not, but the conference is taking a beating right now when it comes to narrative wise, which, it's all now this gets down to the next thing, the actual on-field product. Right. And one thing to think about, moving towards like next season is, which kind of league is in a better spot?
Yeah.
Um, it's an interesting question.
It's a fascinating question.
Now,
because they're kind of in similar spots, honestly. They're about to expand to 12 teams, adding G5 brands to do so, and they just lost their two biggest media draws for football. And UCLA is not the second biggest brand for football in the conference, but they are one of the most viewed. They're probably like the fifth biggest brand in terms of football and what they've done there. But USC is clearly number one, Oregon's number two, Washington's probably number three, Stanford's probably number four, and then UCLA at five in terms of like your strongest brands there. So I do think, talking about perception and reality, the idea that the Pac-12 is going to be so much worse off in football without those schools. Are they worse off? Yes. But is it as bad as people think? I don't think that answer is true because UCLA has not been consistently relevant. It's taken Chip Kelly. It took him like 4 years just to make them into an 8-9 win team, and they can't crack 10 wins. So that's.
I think the issue is this. I think it's the loss of depth, right? You and I were talking before, and you have to admit this. I mean, while they're not these excellent schools, they add depth to a league that has a bottom. And look, we don't know what's going to happen with Colorado, but here's the thing: is as much as we love what's happening with Deion's momentum, he is from the southeast part of the United States. Maybe he stays at Colorado for 20 years. I would bet against that, right? I think it's something we have to acknowledge.
Well, yeah, I mean, most coaches don't stay places for 20 years.
Well, sure, but I think maybe less than 5 is kind of what we're actually talking about here. Colorado and obviously number one, Stanford, Cal, those have all been down. Actually, and the good thing, the interesting part is the schools that have been left out of the realignment conversation, namely Washington State and Oregon State, have been very solid depth to a league. Very solid depth. But the problem is, if you weed out a USC who's towards the top and a UCLA who is middle but towards the top, you have now lost. Yes.
They're like, if you look at them the last 15 years, they're like squarely towards the middle.
With Chip, it's fine. It's still competitive depth. I would say this: while the heavy hitters, Washington and Oregon, on a year-to-year basis, you probably like their chances over the TCUs and the Baylors of the world. The one thing that drew Fox back to the Big 12 was there is so much competitive depth in this league. We're putting really good games on TV all the time, whether it be TCU, Kansas State, TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State. You kind of switch the Rubik's Cube and turn it around. You're getting all kinds of these good matchups. The Pac-12 top to bottom is not offering that. Think about it like this too. The Big 12 in the last 3 seasons, I mentioned this a bunch in the podcast, but for Pac-12 fans, has had 6 separate teams in the Big 12 championship game. 5 of them are remaining members. Iowa State back in 21, they played Oklahoma. Baylor, then Oklahoma State, then TCU, then K-State. And then this year, the best story in the league, for the first half of the season, they got College Game Day there, was
Kansas.
Fantastic. We saw with Kansas, right?
We're not going to expect that to be super sustainable, though, right?
No. Oh well, Lance Leipold, they might be better, but like there is more depth in this league than there in the Big 12 than there is a Pac-12. The top may be a bit better, but I think the cyclical changes make the Big 12 overall, in my opinion, a more entertaining conference on a game-to-game basis.
I think that particular argument is contingent upon the G5 schools that the Big 12 is adding being pretty competitive right away.
Sure.
Because if you're asking me right now, I mean, Washington State is a pretty darn tough job, but that's also a Washington State team that went into Madison last year and beat Wisconsin. Down year for the Badgers, sure, but again,
massive accomplishment.
Yes, massive, and they play them again this year. Like if they win that game against Wisconsin with Luke Fickell there, that'd be one of the biggest wins for Washington State football in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, it would be up there with beating Oregon on College Game Day.
This year
100%. It's the first time they beat a ranked, I'm pretty sure Wisconsin was ranked in that game. It's the first time they beat a ranked Power 5 team on the road since like the 90s, right? Like it's absolutely massive. And so I think I've seen what Cincinnati can be with Luke Fickell and Brian Kelly at the helm. I don't even remember who their new coach is, honestly, but
it's Scott Satterfield.
Where'd he come from?
Louisville.
Okay, so you have a respectable head coach there for sure, but I've seen what Cincinnati can be with these other great coaches, but we don't know that Satterfield can get them to that level. I've seen Gus Malzahn win games at Auburn, never at a conference championship level consistently from time to time. I think that's a quality coach to be bringing into your league.
Let's give Gus some credit here.
Oh, well, hold on. No, I'm a Gus Malzahn defender. I don't think he ever should have been fired from Auburn. I think it was ridiculous they fired him from Auburn. And Zach Blackerby is probably shaking in his boots hearing us say that right now.
I want to ask you this, though. Out of those 4 new schools they're adding, I would ask you, like, wouldn't you like their chances against all 3 Pac-12? Like, because here's the thing. Colorado, I don't really, like, we've got no clue what that's going to look like. No clue. I expect it's going to be somewhat decent. But I would like the chances of last year. Let's go last year because that's all we have. Last year's UCF, last year's Cincinnati that was down year, last year's BYU, and last year's Houston over all 3 of the bottom dwellers in the Pac-12. I think they'd be favored in all those games.
I think that's correct. And I think those schools were just way. And by the way, you left Arizona State out of that conversation. And they're doing a lot of interesting things with Kenny Dillingham here, adding Jaden Rashada. They've added a lot of players in the port.
And that's why I think subconsciously I didn't even add him, because I expect, once again, you know this, I know this, Arizona State should be good at athletics.
Oh, sleeping giant. Reason. Okay, a buddy of mine who went to Arizona State has lamented for years to me time and time again, and I completely agree with him. There is zero excuse, zero reason that Arizona State and Arizona, frankly, and Arizona basketball has got it figured out, but football has just been a different story. I do like what Jed Fish is doing there for sure. There's zero excuse for those schools to not be top-tier football programs, right? Like, it just came down over the years to money a little bit, but investment and coaching hires, right? Like, if you're just looking, take out everything you know about these particular schools. Why is Oregon a better place to be a coach than Arizona or Arizona State? Arizona's got way more talent in its backyard, proximity to California, closer proximity to Texas. It's a more attractive place to just go to school. Like, Oregon's got a beautiful campus, but like Arizona, come on, man.
This is why I think Arizona State they're a very compelling options if they join the Big 12, because, and here's the thing, I know they're adding SMU, but the fact that 5 schools in the Big 12 are located in Texas, and you're making trips, you make 3 or 4 trips there a year to Tech, Baylor, TCU, Houston, all those places, right? I mean, you're making all of those trips and you're playing those schools. I think it expands their recruiting profile a bit more. Also, this too about the kind of exodus from California that's happening to a place like Arizona. I think there is a compelling argument to be made about why ASU could thrive, and Arizona, for that matter, football, they could be set up to thrive more in a place like the Big 12. Now, this is not me making the argument for them to come. I'm just saying I have thought about that at times.
This is why adding SMU makes so much sense for the Pac-12.
Right.
Because you want to have a footprint in Texas. It's not just so that you can get into the Dallas media market, and I know SMU isn't the biggest TV draw there at this point in time, but when they get to the Power 5 level, I'd rather go in that direction than in a number of other ones they could potentially go for there. But it also helps the other schools in the league, because they're now going to come to the state of Texas. You're now going to get watched by more people in the state of Texas, and they're going to get to see the programs, and they could make that's just what the appeal of SMU is, right? And why I would have loved for them to be able to get Houston in this realignment, because I think obviously it would have been a perfect travel partner. You got another good sized media market down there in Houston. It would have been a great fit for the Pac-12. And in that sense, your mark definitely outmaneuvered Kliavkoff over the last couple of years or so on that front. But I think getting there is an advantage for the Pac-12. And I do think the bottom does need to rise, because I think you make a compelling point. Like, if Kansas is the worst team going forward, or at least has got the worst tradition, like Kansas is the bottom, right? Or Kansas is the team most likely to bottom out. We saw what they were capable of this year, but then they also went 1-7 down the stretch.
Yeah, Jalen Daniels was out though.
That's true. But again, right, other schools can survive losing a starting quarterback more easily than others, right? So like Ohio State, won a national championship, much to my chagrin, with a third string quarterback. Like that's just the way that it goes. But I agree with you about the top, because I think if you look at the teams, what their potential is, where they're at right now, where their programs are going, Yeah, TCU was really, really fun this year. Who's betting them to get back to a 14 playoff next year? I am not.
I'm not.
Not even a little bit on that front. So your top schools, and it could be really an interesting case study from a viewership standpoint of what's more valuable to a conference, having depth or having more high-end teams. Because I think you look at Oregon with Dan Lanning, Utah and Kyle Whittingham, Washington and Kalen DeBoer, those are your top 3 teams going forward. And then if Colorado, and I was talking about this yesterday on the show, Colorado is the biggest wild card here and could be absolutely crucial for football competitiveness in the Pac-12 going forward. Because I think what we've seen in recruiting in college football is if you recruit at a really high level, you're not automatically going to hit your ceiling. Oregon's won the Pac-12 high school recruiting battle each of the last 4 or 5 years, but they haven't won the championship every year, right? But where have they been? A very, very high floor program with double-digit wins in each of their last 3 full college football seasons, 12 in 2019 and then 10 each of the last 2 years. So if Deion Sanders is going to recruit, let's say he stays, and I've speculated about this before, it's anybody's guess what job he'd be interested in, what jobs come available and such. Let's say he stays at Colorado for 5 years. If he stacks 3 top 10 to 20 recruiting classes together, that's going to raise the floor dramatically. It's not a guarantee that they'll win a conference championship, but just by virtue, as long as they are able to get more than just a couple positions, which I think they can, if they just recruit at that level for several years, it's hard to not see them in 2 years being an 8 to 9 win team, just because they will have more talented players than a lot of other teams in the conference. And it's Colorado, which is a solid academic school, but it's not restrictive the way the Bay Area schools are. And I think that's the challenge for the Pac-12 is the Bay Area schools have a lot of money at the universities, have potential that we've seen, the Cal less so. But Cal back in the day was actually very good. Cal in
they
the
have
late
no desire to be good now.
Yeah, it kind of feels that way, right? Like there was a game, I think it was the Cal-Washington game. They brought on Justin Forsett and Marshawn Lynch, great Cal running backs from the past. And Marshawn Lynch was, first of all, he swore like 3 times on national television because he's Marshawn Lynch. But he looked around the stadium and was like, "What's going on? What are we doing? This is not how it used to be." So I think Cal and Stanford are in tough spots going forward, but I don't see a team in the Big 12 that has, I think, the ceiling that, consistently that an Oregon, Washington, or Utah does.
Right. Well, those are blue chip ratio schools too. So I'm with you on that.
Utah is kind of the new kid on the block on that front.
Well, they're not there. They're not there. But Washington and Oregon are the blue chip ratio schools. That's why.
Right. Yeah. No, they're the flagship bearers from a football standpoint in the conference going forward. Whether you're looking at TV viewership, brand power, competitiveness, quality of teams, the coaches that they've got, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. All right. That will do it for today's show. Spencer, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Locked On Pac-12, Monday through Friday, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also on Locked On Ducks if you want to hear more about Oregon as well. But yeah, this was fun. We could have gone for a solid hour and a half.
Yeah,
we might have to just do this again.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Just as long as we don't have to talk about Pac-12 basketball. There has never been a greater manifestation of the iconic Moneyball line. There's Arizona. And there's UCLA. And then there's 50 feet of crap. And then there's everyone else.
You guys can find me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. You guys can find the show at LOBig12. You guys can get us wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. All right, Spencer, we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, indeed.